So a little while ago, when I posted my review of the latest Doctor Who season, I made sure to underline a point rarely expressed on YouTube media review channels that some stuff is just not made for you, and if it's not, that doesn't necessarily make it bad. I did get a bit of mild pushback for this, and I do understand why, because I held the opposite opinion to this myself not that long ago, and I'll give you that it is a fairly reasonable one. I used to be of the opinion that whatever your age, you should be able to get something out of any kind of story, and that the best stories are universal to some degree. But I've started moving away from this opinion as I've gotten older and have less and less time for film and TV and have to be more particular with how I spend my free time, and I've been gravitating more towards what I'm going to be calling the Paw Patrol principle. We can sit here with an episode of Paw Patrol and debate its merits all you want. Is it well told? Are the characters compelling? Are the characters used correctly according to the established rules of the Paw Patrol universe? Does the animation look good? Is the voice acting fit for purpose? Has it got the right tone? But the most fundamental question is this: would you waste your spare time watching this? Outside of the context of needing something to watch with your kid. The answer to that question is almost always going to be probably not, and if it is probably not, then you've proven my point. Paw Patrol is not made for an adult to waste their spare time watching it. Paw Patrol is made for the very specific purpose of being a show for parents to watch with their kids and to sell merchandise related to the show with their kids' favourite characters on it. Sometimes by a happy accident a show like Friendship is Magic can cross that barrier between kids and adults, but it is quite rare and crossing it isn't the point of the exercise at the moment of conception. And whether it does cross that barrier or not isn't really a factor in whether it's done the job that it's set out to do. And you can apply this principle on quite a lot of shows whether you want to admit that or not. Your grandma is probably not going to like Severance, is she? And likewise, you're probably not going to like Virgin River. And this conversation has led me on to a question that I keep coming back to that no Doctor Who fans seem to want to think too deeply about, but it has become more relevant as the landscape of broadcasting has changed, and if this has occurred to me, then it's definitely occurred to Russell T Davies and everyone high up who's involved with Doctor Who at the BBC and at Disney+, and that question comes in two parts. The first, who is Doctor Who for? We've always referred to it as a family show. Typically on the internet, when you refer to it as a children's show, fans will push back at you and correct you to family show because it's meant to be a show for people of all ages. And that means it's socially acceptable for a man in his mid-30s to watch it alone and obsessively collect the merchandise. But if we remove the needlessly defensive attempt to kick back against a societal stigma, which you don't even need to do, like, go ahead and watch kids' shows if you want. Collect the merchandise. It's your life, no one else's. Do whatever you want with it. Who cares what idiots think of you? Alright, in theory, Doctor Who is meant for everyone, but here's the second bit. Does a show that's broadly meant for everyone still work in the streaming environment? Because I'm not quite so sure of that one. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about Doctor Who's viewing figures being nowhere near as high as they once were. The less observant among us keep bringing these figures up with reference to the show's quality. Apparently the show's rubbish now, and the fact the viewing figures are lower than they used to be confirms my view. When in actual fact these numbers can tell 1,000 different stories and are more a tracker of viewing habits than anything else. The viewing figures always used to go up with the Christmas specials, not because people expected these specials to be better than the main series, so much as the fact they were broadcast on Christmas Day, after everyone's had turkey, opened presents, and no one's got anything else to do. It's not just a random Saturday in the year when people might be out. You've got a trapped audience. That's why more people watched it than usual. If you try and look at things from outside the perspective of the fandom, you will see that Doctor Who is starting to look like a relic of a bygone era, because people just don't watch TV in the same way they used to. When the show was first commissioned in the 60s, it was there to bridge the gap between the sport and a pop music show. It was conceived to be broadcast at a time when it was highly likely that every member of the family would be in the living room with the TV on, and this continued to work for a very long time. That broadcast slot is a much more crucial part of the Doctor Who story than people give it credit for. Sometime between 5 and 7 PM on Saturdays, around dinner time, before the teenagers go out, before the younger kids go to bed. Most people watched it because, well, what else are you going to do at the time? Your spare time is limited to a much shorter list of things that you could do before the internet, and a fun space adventure show's on TV that everyone else is watching, so you might as well watch it, right? This still made sense during the original Russell era because of the lack of alternative things to do at 7 PM on a Saturday. Phones still looked like this in the mid-2000s. I remember watching the exclusive episode prologues made for Series 2 in 144p on the BBC website and it crashing halfway through a 2-minute clip. Broadcast TV and appointment-based viewing where everyone was watching the same show on the same day at the same time was still a big deal during the Russell era because even though people did have the freedom to save it till later, it still required effort. I was still recording Doctor Who on VHS tapes in Series 3, moving to blank DVD-Rs by Series 4. Then iPlayer became a thing, and suddenly you could watch it online whenever you wanted, with the caveat of if you could get a stable internet connection, which was much less likely when iPlayer first launched. Nowadays, you can usually get a stable internet connection, and you can get iPlayer on a smart TV, so there is almost no incentive at all to watch an episode of Doctor Who on broadcast anymore. Maybe wanting to avoid spoilers? Maybe. That crucial broadcast slot that was a key part of the way the show was designed is now completely irrelevant now that it's easier to watch a show whenever you want than it is to organise your life around a TV listing. And the idea of a show designed for communal family viewing makes even less sense now that families typically have 5 or 6 screens in their home. A few phones, some laptops, a tablet or two. If the teenager wants to go off and watch something else, they'll go off and watch something else. And if only one kid in the house is watching it, why do both mum and dad have to waste their spare time watching it with them when mum's 3 episodes behind on Virgin River and no one else in the house cares about it? Streaming content is becoming much more niche as more choice and control over the viewing experience has been granted to the viewer. Shows and movies that would never have flown in prior decades are suddenly finding massive audiences now because the broadcaster isn't having to try and come up with something that's broadly marketed at everyone who happens to be in the living room at the same time. I remember watching this film I found on Netflix several years ago called I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, directed by Osgood Perkins, who you now know as the director of 2024's big horror smash Longlegs. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House is a very quiet horror film and it feels like it was specifically made for people like me. Late 20s to early 30s, reads Shirley Jackson, enjoys long lonely walks in the woods, listens to ambient music. This film probably wouldn't have gotten made in prior decades, or if it had, it wouldn't have found distribution on such a huge platform. It feels like it was targeted at someone like me specifically, and it found me by one of the biggest TV and film distribution platforms in the world. Do you know that Black Mirror was actually about to be cancelled at Channel 4 before it got picked up by Netflix? Seems insane now, given just how huge it is, but it makes sense to me why a broadcaster who has to worry about time slots wouldn't see it making sense to continue with Black Mirror, while a streamer that doesn't have the same issues would see huge potential to reach the kind of esoteric dark sci-fi enthusiasts whose movements through a living room are much more difficult to map. As I watched those opening episodes of that season of Doctor Who with its singing goblins and talking babies, I could picture what was being marketed as a new iteration of Doctor Who that's been retooled, so now it's a show kinda one step up from Paw Patrol, going more for that 8 to 12 age range than Doctor Who's main series used to back in the late 2000s. You know why the Christmas specials were always much more bombastic and light-hearted? The audience was much more likely to include younger kids. And that seemed to be the mould that Russell was going for here, making it the type of show that parents could watch with their kids so they could bond over it. Maybe they don't watch everything together, but this is something the kids will enjoy and it probably won't make the parents totally sick to death. Problem is that Doctor Who also has older millennials watching who've been watching since the Russell era, and they were never given an indication of what age you're supposed to stop watching something like this. You know, so far as societal convention goes. But these people would probably get bored if it was stuck at this gear the whole time because while they still watch Doctor Who, they've changed as people and their tastes have changed over the 2 decades it's been on the air. So it's got to quickly divert back into being this variety show where you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes it's mature, sometimes it isn't. So he has some episodes designed to speak to us older people who are also watching, like 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble. And yeah, sure, I had fun, but these episodes probably didn't go over so well with those families with the 8 to 12 year olds. Same deal with the finale, which is designed for the classic Doctor Who obsessives. Complain at me all you want, success or failure, that's who it's obviously designed for. So while I had fun with the episodes targeted at me, I'm left here wondering whether a show like that with such a broad audience really works anymore. Back during the original Russell era, I was a teenager, and me and my mum used to watch Doctor Who together, and we had a great time. I moved out, and we would still talk about it on the phone, and she kept up with it for a while, but she slowly fell away as we spent less and less time together, only watching the odd new episode here and there. There was no function that Doctor Who was fulfilling as a communal experience for us anymore. Then in 2024, I watched 73 Yards on my own, and because I knew my mum was a fan of the Danny Robbins podcast Uncanny on BBC Sounds, because she'd put it on when I went to visit her once, on that basis, I could just feel that she was going to like 73 Yards. So I went to see her, and we watched it together, and I was right, we had a great time with 73 Yards. It was a nice communal viewing experience, the type of which I haven't had in years, but I knew it wouldn't last. 73 Yards was very divisive because it's only going to serve a tiny cross-section of the Doctor Who fandom who like the sort of folk horror ghost story thing it's going for. I know the entire show isn't going to turn into this, and so me and my mum haven't watched any of the other episodes together and probably won't. If I didn't have this YouTube channel and people in my audience looking at me for an opinion, I will admit that I probably would have watched Church on Ruby Road, thought to myself, oh, it's not for me anymore, is it? And not bothered. Maybe if I wasn't doing this, I would have browsed this season for episodes that looked interesting and skipped the rest because they're clearly not made for me. And really, can a show in the streaming era work like that? What other shows work like that? Outside of old sitcoms made for broadcast TV in the 90s and 2000s that have found renewed success when they've been uploaded to streaming services. The move to Disney Plus has come with this statement that Doctor Who is now setting out to fit in line with the streaming environment, but people don't dip in and out of major streaming shows and they don't expect the wide variety that's been Doctor Who's brand for a long time now. What people do with a streaming show is they find a new show to try, they watch one episode, maybe the second, if they like it they continue, if they don't they abandon it. The type of person primed to love 73 Yards would watch Church on Ruby Road and would definitely abandon the show and never get to experience something that was made for them. Star Wars is something that seems to understand the fragmentation of modern audiences. Forget the quality for a moment and the rants you're all about to burst into, that's a different topic entirely. Remember, this is a sociological discussion. What Star Wars has done is it's realised it's a massive established franchise doing lots of different things for lots of different people, and it's splintered itself into a bunch of different types of shows for different types of Star Wars fans. Mandalorian and Boba Fett for the original trilogy fans, Obi-Wan Kenobi for the millennials who saw the prequels when we were kids, Young Jedi Adventures for the younger kids, Star Wars Resistance for the slightly older kids. They've done that because Disney's realised that it's quite rare for people to watch the same show these days. Sure, Stranger Things is broadly built for everyone, Wednesday as well to a certain degree, going for that broad range of potential audiences like Doctor Who does, but outside of the major hits like that, micro-targeting appears to be the new model for ongoing series. Marvel have done this model as well. Out of all their shows, I've only bothered with WandaVision, because I'm an esoteric weirdo who likes metafiction. The rest of it's not really my thing. Whereas Star Wars and Marvel movies, designed for a cinema experience, are still broadly speaking for everyone, because they're typically communal outings where the audience are still varied, and they have different subsets that they need to bring together with something for everyone. Streaming shows are much more convenient to throw on by yourself on a tablet at the end of the day when you're sat in bed and you're not ready to go to sleep yet. And Doctor Who is a big franchise like Star Wars and Marvel, but it has the handicap of being a series designed to be watched at home in an environment that now bears basically no resemblance to the one it was born into. Granted, there is the Stranger Things and Wednesday point, and the interesting thing about them is that while they're broadly built for everyone, unlike Doctor Who as it exists now, they're serialized. One season tells one long story. It's not this rapidly shape-shifting variety show from week to week. Doctor Who used to be serialised during the classic era, but serials stopped making sense after a while as people didn't really keep up with them week after week anymore. Changes in work culture in the 80s meant it was more common for people to be working irregular schedules, and they'd often miss episodes. So a show that's designed to be kept up with where every episode matters didn't really make sense anymore. Soap operas exploded in popularity around the time EastEnders launched, and shows designed to be dipped in and out of became popular. The original Russell era was kind of like that too. If I saw Rise of the Cybermen, which I'm more likely to make time for because it's got a recognisable monster's name in the title, but I missed Idiot's Lantern, Love and Monsters and Fear Her, I'll still be able to enjoy the finale. In the present day, streaming has completely removed the problem of people potentially missing episodes. If there's a season of a show, your audience will have watched all of it. So things actually seem to be trending back towards serials where we get one long continuous story every few years or so. I know this fandom finds it hard to give him brownie points for anything, but Chris Chibnall was actually onto something with the whole Flux 6-episode story arc thing. Because one long story for a season is how things work these days. And he might have gotten away with it if the whole thing had been streamlined and hadn't come across as this disparate ragbag of stories like Doctor Who usually does that probably got Frankenstein together when the season episode number got cut. And even if it had worked, you have to be a very, very special case to be a show that solves the fragmented audience problem. Funnily enough, Doctor Who was actually the progenitor of this current wave of filtering out component audience subsets into separate entities. Torchwood was a spin-off for the adults in Doctor Who's audience. The Sarah Jane Adventures was a spin-off for the younger kids in Doctor Who's audience. Now Russell's back and the show's on Disney+, apparently it is going in the spin-off direction again with this whole Whoniverse concept and the upcoming Sea Devils show, which I'm assuming is going to be more for the classic Doctor Who fans given its focus on a classic Doctor Who monster. And if this is an indication that Russell and the high-ups want to move the franchise in line with the Star Wars and Marvel models, then you have to wonder whether the parent show is actually still necessary or even viable in the modern world. The tablet has been both a blessing and a curse. Streaming has widened the variety of shows that we're likely to get. Shows with LGBT main characters like Heartstopper are finding audiences now that networks aren't trying harder to come up with a show meant for everyone, instead of actually serving an audience of people that we know exists. But the tablet has also meant that people don't really watch shows together anymore. And so shows like Doctor Who that were originally conceived for a specific time slot where everyone would be watching TV together don't really make that much sense in the modern day. I can't really see Doctor Who as it exists now taking hold of everyone if it was launched these days. It got rebooted in 2005 and it swapped showrunners, companions, doctors, but in terms of the core function it's designed to carry out, it's pretty much the same as it always was. If you don't believe me that this is really quite an obvious problem, try watching back Series 1 of the reboot while attempting to remove your nostalgia goggles. Watch it while actively comparing it to shows that you watch nowadays and Doctor Who as it currently exists. Yes, it's good. Very good. But it is very obvious that it is now older than the last classic Doctor Who serial was at the point that it was made, and it is also incredibly similar to Doctor Who as it exists in the present day. While the show's relevance and critical and audience reception has been waning over the course of the last decade or so, and everyone's quick to blame the quality of it, the writing, etc., I don't think it's a simple case where we can totally say it's the quality of the show that's at fault. Sure, sometimes it flat out sucks, but there's rarely a simple one-size-fits-all answer to everything. There can be multiple factors in a show's decline, and the fact the world and the landscape of broadcasting has drastically changed is one that I never see people in the Doctor Who community talking about. And the reason for that is probably because it inevitably leads to the most distressing of conclusions. And I am sorry, I know this is hard to hear, but this is the point where I have to give the question in this video's title the answer. Yes, obviously. Doctor Who, at least Doctor Who in its current form, is outdated at a foundational level, and it needs some serious restructuring from the ground up to the same extent that Russell restructured it in 2005. And this is not a problem that can be fixed within a year like they're making out that they've done with this whole new reboot thing. It's not impossible to update it, as it has been done before, but it needs doing. If the show wants to fit in with the streaming landscape, it needs to go away for a while and relaunch in a completely new state that fits with the streaming landscape, because as it currently stands, it just does look out of date. But of course, it's easier to blame specific people for its current state. A strong tendency of online fandoms from basically every big franchise that really annoys me because in most cases, personal vendettas just don't get to the root of the problem. Blame Russell T Davies, blame Chris Chibnall, blame Disney, blame the BBC. And this right here is why internet fan communities of basically all the big franchises have been consistently failing to understand why the stuff that they used to like is now bad. They always get caught up in the big personalities and never address the fact that franchises like Doctor Who stick around for decades and age out the infrastructure that they were initially built for. And there's obviously gonna be some teething issues as these franchises try and adapt themselves to changing times. You can't expect stuff that worked in 2005 to work perfectly forever. Yes, I agree. None of the crap that I've talked about in this video should matter. It would be nice if we lived in a world where good art is just good because it's good and bad art is just bad because it's bad, but unfortunately, all of the crap I've talked about in this video does matter. And if you end up in this industry and you're not willing to think like a commissioning executive, you're gonna get left in the dirt. All of us are blinded by our fandom. We want Doctor Who to work, and when it doesn't work, we want to find someone to blame. Sure, the Doctor Who fandom's not going to go away. Doctor Who is an enormous franchise doing lots of different things for lots of different people, making a ton in merchandising, and I can't see that just vanishing overnight. But given the fact we're constantly at war with each other over the quality of whatever it's been putting out recently, some people love it, some people hate it, I would like to see more discussion of this one overriding question that no one wants to think about. If Doctor Who was a new franchise that was being launched today, would it catch on? Answer me that. No self-denial, no fanboy factionalism, no vendettas, no talk of the big personalities. Look at the broader landscape of streaming and tell me honestly if you think this model still works.